Chapter 1, Prologue. Unknown Land. In an alien land filled with gloom, death, and paradoxically, the prosperity of natural resources, there was a place called Grave of Villages. It was located right at the heart of the human territory, in the geographical center of this world. The number of villages destroyed in the area through the millennia was insurmountable, and so were the villages continuously built in the place due to the available resources. It was also one of the good hunting grounds for lower mid-level professionals, because the monsters were not too weak, but not too strong for people above villager level. In the terminology from their hometown, it was a perfect grinding spot. This was where a small group of foreigners, men from another realm, was staying to train in the most efficient way available to them. "This place is really creepy," one person said as he chewed on his barbecue, some of the sauce falling on his shoes. The man was not bad-looking. He had been known to be a bit metrosexual back home, but his blonde hair had turned almost brown from all the grime from their endless adventures lately. All his previous cleanliness had long gone down the drain. "I mean, seriously," he mumbled, looking around. Even if it was dark, they had enhanced vision, and the 2 moons were enough illumination for them. What crept him out was that this place had great resources, but the monster mobs were consistent at certain times. It was as if the resources were attracting food for the mobs. He shivered. No wonder villages, which only had professionals around level 10 or so, would almost always give way after a while. The consumption really couldn't keep up with the gathering of strength. The others didn't say anything, though they understood his sentiment. It was just that they weren't here to stay, only to train, and so that was what they ought to focus on. "Where's the captain?" a young man with coiffed hair asked, chewing on a yellow fruit in his hand. The dark-skinned man beside him looked at a nearby hill, nodding in that direction. "I saw him go over there." "Surveying." "It's our 3rd day here." "Just focus on your own food, Turbo." A voice next to them sneered, before taking away the remaining barbecue stick. "Hey!" The blonde frowned and glared at the newcomer, who was crossing his arms as he stood above them, arrogantly holding someone else's food. Jake was a man with spiky hair that he had managed to mysteriously maintain despite their lack of resources. He ate the food he borrowed in a few bites, making the other gasp in aghast. Jake met Turbo's eyes and began to reprimand them. He even pointed at him using the now-empty stick. "Don't talk behind the captain's back. Don't you know he has eyes everywhere?" The others were prepared to beat him up a bit, but then he looked in a direction, shoulders slightly slumped. He probably just wanted to be alone for now. He'd have looked cool and introspective had he cleaned up the remainder of the sauce on his mouth. So he still received that small beating regardless. At this time, the aforementioned captain was standing still, illuminated by 2 moons. With a straight posture, he was standing on a hill, overlooking the land, his sharp eyes surveying the surroundings. His handsome silhouette formed a contrast to the otherwise desolate view. His body was tense and alert, ready for whatever major changes would occur in a while. However, after confirming that the night would be quiet for a bit longer, he allowed himself a moment of respite, because he wouldn't be able to rest for a long time after the fight started. He took out a phone from his space, his sharp eyes immediately becoming soft as the screen lit up to show him images of his beloved. A small smile crept up his lips, making his features even more prominent. He was a strikingly handsome man, with chiseled features and a well-toned physique, wide shoulders, and lean muscular build. His hair was trimmed, as neatly as their condition allowed, with his short ebony hair framing his chiseled features. What was most notable was his undeniable aura of masculinity and strength. He was the type of person who demanded attention wherever he went. At the moment, however, he was alone, somber, looking intently at the photos on his palm, showing a rare vulnerability visible to only one person. Unfortunately, that person wasn't there with him. But unlike the others, he refused to believe he wouldn't be able to go back to her. He would be able to get back to her. He felt it in his bones. Even if he didn't, He would do whatever he had to make it possible. As he stared at her image, his striking blue eyes shone like sapphires even in the night. They not only reflected the light of the two moons, but they also shined with the light of determination and longing, and it was unbreakable and firm. "My wife," he said, tone filled with tenderness. "Wait for me." But the screen turned black and he frowned, his face turning pale when he saw that his phone battery had gone. In this world where there was no electricity, would this be, as long as he remained in this hell, the last time he could see her image? His jaw hardened at the thought, and the softness in his eyes changed to one of annoyance and bitterness. If any one of his teammates were there, they would fear for their lives. And this happened to be the sight that one of his subordinates, his right-hand man, ended up seeing. The newcomer was also quite dashing, with prominent features, lean muscles, and shoulder-length hair flowing with the wind. He had pale skin unfitting for a soldier, which turned a bit paler as he felt the atmosphere surrounding the captain. However, he quickly gathered himself and walked to the man he respected the most in this world. "Captain Garin," he said, greeting the man, doing away with the standard salute as ordered. "Gil, they're here." At his words, the remaining vulnerability in the captain's eyes was replaced by his characteristic sternness. His well-defined jaw tightened in seriousness. "Let's go," the ebony-haired man said, his deep, resonant voice echoing the eerie hill. He joined a group of a few dozen soldiers from their homeland, an air of gravitas that demanded everyone's respect oozing off of him. They stood in a formation, waiting for the black wave of monsters to reach their line of sight. Soon, they would be facing a mob of monsters that they had thought they'd only see in horror movies. But here they were. The captain, however, was unmoved, and his stability affected his people. He did not say anything to them, as he had already told them everything he could in their hundreds of battles together. Instead, he walked forward, posture erect, with his every movement exuding strength and discipline. He walked toward the approaching mob, and grotesque forms soon came to view. Within a few blinks, a monster faster than the others quickly reached a few meters away from him. He raised his arms, and the air around him changed, colder, and a small patch of land under him turned to ice, extending to capture the monster's feet, debilitating it. He quickly took out a weapon from his space, beheading the monster, using the same movement to defend against a new monster that reached him. His team had also sprinted to the mob, different elements illuminating the dark skies. The man still believed in his people. They could still handle a low-level mob like this. With this thought, he quickly moved deeper into the mob to kill more of these beasts. His eyes were shining with determination in every swing of his sword. It was time for them to fight and become stronger. Only in this way could they have the ability to return home. And he would definitely go back to her, whatever it took. Chapter 2, The Sun is Dying. Terran Star, Modern Era Year 2212. "Home, HMN." A soft, velvety voice uttered as she listened to the sound of newscasters reporting news after news of criminal cases, scandals, and natural disasters. Dainty hands raised the electronic tablet, and after a finger pressed the screen, the display on the screen changed with a click. Breaking news. The Terran Cosmic Research Center reports an unprecedented drop in the sun's hydrogen level. Scientists at the TCRC warn that humanity's window for preparation has been dramatically shrunk to a few decades at best. This is a major departure from the previously accepted knowledge of at least 1,000 years. In response to this urgent situation, 47 countries, including our own Eden country, have publicly announced the acceleration of spaceship development. These cutting-edge spaceships are meticulously designed to carry the over 10 billion Terran inhabitants, along with genetic material of all known species, in a bid to preserve the planet's already dwindling biodiversity. The ships will also carry live specimens of the most vital animal and plant species, carefully chosen to sustain an effective ecosystem during the migration. The sound and lights were abruptly cut by another click, followed by a soft sigh. The owner of the voice was sitting lazily on her chaise lounge, her relaxed posture revealing confident poise, and her well-manicured hands absent-mindedly patting her big belly. She now sat alone inside a classically decorated room, her long dark hair gracefully cascading down her back, and its deep brown hue reflected hints of copper under the light of the morning sun. Slowly, her striking green orbs, framed by her long feathering lashes, opened. However, as she recalled the contents of the report, her eyes narrowed slightly, heart felt heavy. She had an intuition. They don't have enough time. Unless there was a miracle, they would all die. Just a pity for her children, who may not even get the chance to experience the world, even if it was just for a while. You shouldn't watch such depressing news so early in the morning, Missy. A pleasant-looking woman sounded from the kitchen. On her hands was a silver tray with a warm cup of milk. The woman carefully placed the items on the side table and stood professionally a few meters away, ready to be called. "Thank you, Nanny," the young woman said. Her feathery voice landed on the nanny's ears, causing her to smile unconsciously. The pregnant woman did not sit properly, but only lifted her upper body so she could get a sip of her warm milk. The nanny stared at the girl she watched grow up, from a thin orphan to the present beauty of infinite charm. The woman's luscious hair framed her oval face, accentuating her beautiful features. Her unique emerald eyes were further emphasized by the beauty mark under her right eye. The girl's pregnancy added a soft femininity that made her more attractive. She couldn't help but recall how she was only a few years prior. This girl had been a bit of a tomboy for as far as she could remember. Motherhood could change anyone, and this stubborn girl, Althea, it seemed, was no exception. "Well, I was hoping they would get news of that guy, but they showed me the galaxy's potential death instead," she said jokingly, but the nanny did not smile with her. "Missy." She raised her hand to stop the topic. She knew she was the one to open the topic, and she regretted it the moment she said it. She knew the pain she felt when she found out her husband went missing months ago. Nearly half a year ago, her husband was called for a top-secret mission by their government. It was normal to be out of contact for a month or so. However, after 2 months, they had no news at all. A sense of dread stabbed her every day until she finally couldn't handle it anymore and started calling the higher-ups. Fortunately, she had some connections and power in the government, thanks to her contributions, so she didn't get dismissed on the first call. However, they delayed the meeting continuously until a brave media reporter, an old friend of theirs, revealed the results of his investigation. Apparently, hundreds of soldiers went missing less than a month after their mission started. Worse, they had already been presumed dead. It felt like she was submerged in cold water, and she immediately went to the headquarters and demanded an answer. She almost had a miscarriage at the time, and could be said to be the worst day of her life so far. She did not even know she was pregnant. Fortunately, her brother was next to her, and she was taken to hospital in time for treatment. Otherwise, she'd have followed her family to the grave. After recovering, she and her brother spent most of their business profits finding out the news, tapping several illegal channels by the way. Eventually, their reporter friend hinted at some clues. However, it was extremely difficult to get news without risking life. Her brother helped her control public opinion, slowly revealing the clues they had, and eventually, the government gave in to public pressure. The answer was frankly not something any one of them had expected. An odd fluctuation in space was discovered months ago, and weird animalistic monsters came out in droves. There were a total of 300 soldiers from 10 countries that went on that mission, but not a single one returned. Not even a piece of the dozen tanks and bombers they sent were seen. No one still knew what happened. Shortly afterward, the sun's problem was confirmed, and it got more difficult to get an answer from the government. She and the other families funded their own searches, but to no avail. Now the sun's problem exploded, no pun intended, and this problem had been completely set aside. Just like that, Other than their families and friends, no one remembered those missing soldiers anymore. "I'm sure the master is fine," Nanny said. "He will definitely come back to you," and she said so with certainty. Although the madam's husband was often away, her experienced eyes could see how much that man loved his wife. He was the type of man who could jump off a cliff if she wanted a flower hanging dangerously on the side. It would break the madam if the husband was confirmed to be gone. Right now, she and the girl just firmly believed that he was fine somewhere. Althea hummed, and although her tone seems noncommittal, her bright eyes expressed her firm belief. Then she turned her head to the older woman. "I'm glad you're here, Nanny." Althea said so sincerely. This woman had basically raised the three of them because their parents were often busy with their careers. Now that their parents were dead, her husband was also missing, and her brother would inevitably have his own life. She didn't know what would happen if Nanny wasn't here. The older woman smiled warmly. It was at this time that they heard the digital lock sound from the main door. They simultaneously turned their heads to meet the handsome, smiling face of the newcomer. "Sister." Her expression softened as she smiled at the newcomer. "Ansel, you're back," she uttered, finally putting down her small feet to give the newcomer space to sit next to her. Ansel stared at her for a few more seconds before walking closer and naturally sitting down next to her. He smiled and handed her the small box of snacks he brought with him. Althea's eyes warmed at the sight of her brother. The childish little brat had grown his dark curly hair a little beyond the ear. A few buttons were also left open to show off his collar, and his overall temperament emitted a playboy charm. Of course, this was for outsiders. In front of her, he just looked like an innocent little boy at the beginning of adolescence, dependent on his older sister. "Good morning, sister," he grinned, showing his perfect teeth. "Long time no." Chapter 3, Beginning of the End. Althea laughed at him. "You were here 2 days ago." 48 hours to be exact, he said childishly, squeezing his voice a bit. Althea just shook her head helplessly and looked at the cute snacks he brought with him. It was a box of varied fruit pastries that she liked. It happened that it went well with milk. She hurriedly ate one and took another to familiarly put it in Ansel's mouth. He naturally opened his mouth to take it, looking like that cute little hamster that he was when he was a kid. Ansel might be her adoptive brother, growing up with him since she was around 9 years old, but they were closer to being real siblings than other blood relatives. After all, they, including her now husband who had been adopted with her, had been through precarious situations together as children. It was this event that made Ansel imprint on her a bit, and he often acted like a child around her, to her husband's great disdain. Looking at him, opening his mouth again for another snack, it was obvious that growing up so big didn't do much with his maturity. It was much like how former high school classmates, even after decades, would act like teenagers again when they were together at a reunion. Ansel would act like a kid often when he was around her. It didn't matter if he was 10 or 20 years old. She looked at the next cute pastry that she got her hands on. It was a cute little smiling cartoon dog. She couldn't help but chuckle. "A store opened so early?" she asked as she placed it in her mouth. She took a quick glance at the floating digital clock above the television. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. "Well, the owner is an ex," he said, shrugging. Althea rolled her eyes. This guy changed girlfriends every few weeks. His exes could literally line up along the neighborhood. More than once she and her husband saw him making out with a different girl around the house. Nanny, who was now rolling her eyes, had nagged him about it every day. Of course, depending on the vulgarity. Sometimes her husband would drag him off to train in the backyard afterward. She tried to remember what independence strengthening activity she threw him to before this started, but she couldn't figure out why he turned out to be such a player. Fortunately, all his exes were mysteriously still his platonic friends, otherwise she'd have beaten him up herself. Sensing her judgmental stare, Ansel shrugged. "I can't help it, I'm too charming." Instead of dignifying him with a response, Althea just wore an exaggerated, disgusted expression and looked down at her stomach. "Don't look down on your uncle too much," she told her innocent children. "He just lacks attention." Ansel fake gasped and held his heart as if in pain. He leaned over to whisper to the bulging stomach. "Your uncle is too charming. He can't help it. Here, let me bless you with my amazingness. My little nephew and my little niece, are you behaving well today? Uncle already bought you toys." "Uncle," Ansel continued on his soliloquy, and Althea rolled her eyes. "Stop teaching them bad things. Prenatal education is too important. You know, Mom once said." Her voice was cut off as a thought came to mind. It would be so good if their parents were here. She felt a little emotional to the point that she teared up a little. Damned pregnancy, making her think of weird tangents. Again. But alas, the hormones couldn't be controlled, and she was sobbing a bit. Mom used to say that my birth parents must have given me the best prenatal care for me, since I turned out so well." Ansel frowned, his goofy expression morphing into a serious one. Althea was sad, but Ansel's heart was torn to pieces. Those were his biological parents after all. The three of them, along with Nanny, didn't speak for a while, letting a moment of silence pass by in remembrance of the loved ones that they lost. Ansel's parents were both very kind people. Mom was a professor of history at university, while Dad worked in a pharmaceutical company as a top researcher. They gave all three of them the best they could provide, even when they were so busy with work, whether it was material things or love. They were one of the people who perished during the weird radiation wave that was like a worldwide EMP attack, taking down the plane they were in. It was one of the planes of 10,000 that were flying at that moment. It was also the first sign that the sun was dying quicker than expected, although it wasn't announced to the public at the time. Althea had always felt that her husband's top-secret mission was also related to this event. After some time, Althea calmed down and wiped her eyes, feeling guilty for reopening the wound. She pursed her lips and looked at her brother, looking at him and his formal attire. "The deal is today." Ansel paused for a bit before nodding with a weak smile, though overall taking the change of topic in a stride. They were very used to Althea's mood changes. At first, it made him panic when she suddenly sobbed, but at some point, he just learned to live with it and not let the stress kill him. "Yes, and they even increased their order," he said. Althea nodded. She and Ansel started their own company 2 years prior, with her as the source of technology and formulas, and him as the management helm. She always had a special affinity for plants since she was a child. She not only liked growing them, but she was also fascinated by their effects and combinations. She often poisoned herself by accident because of this, and was frequently at the hospital. If she wasn't so young and cute, according to her husband, the headmistress would have kicked her out for all the excess spending. Anyway, one day, during her probably 37th time at the hospital due to poisoning, a visiting doctor happened to see her by chance. He was very amused when he found out about the cause and effect, and gave her a huge encyclopedia of Terran plants, their effects, and their effective combinations. She later found out that the old man, may he rest in peace, was one of the few pioneers reviving a branch focusing on botanical medicine, and he was at the hospital for a checkup when they first met. Had Ansel's incident not happened when it did, it was estimated the old doctor would have adopted her instead. Still, they had been in contact until his death a few years back. Althea showed great talent in the field and entered the biology and botany specialization as soon as she entered college at the age of 17. Now, she took her thesis project, along with a few other formulas, and formulated beauty formulas and health products. In the past 2 years, she had come up with formulas to treat acne scars, improve stamina, improve eyesight, and improve the smoothness of the skin. Their parents were supportive and used their life savings to invest. Except for the villa they were living in, which was an inheritance from her mother's family, they had pretty much sold everything else. Fortunately, the products took off months before their death, so they were at least rest assured that they would be able to do well when they were gone. She knew her parents very well. Even in their deaths, they would definitely be thinking about the three of them siblings. Just a pity they wouldn't be able to see their grandchildren. They have been looking forward to it even before she got married. This would make us a lot of money, Ansel added, smug, and her lips twitched. The deal Ansel was referring to was a deal with a country south called Delow Country. It was a closed country that refused businesses abroad. This was their second big client next to the military, a deal that had given the company quite a bit of prestige. It was not illegal in their Eden country to deal with these people, so she had no qualms about this deal. If anything, because it was a bit secretive on the other party's side, they were willing to pay twice the market price for it. "I'll definitely get even better deals," Ansel said with confidence. She nodded, also rest assured. "When is your flight?" "In a few hours," he said, tentatively looking at the time. He then turned his head back to look at Althea, opening his arm for a hug. "Anyway, time for me to go." She naturally entered his arms. "Be careful." The man smiled, hugging her a little tighter. "Of course," he said. "I love my life very much." That afternoon, after receiving a call from Ansel about his safe arrival, pregnancy lethargy attacked. "You should take a proper rest in your bedroom," Nanny said, gently patting her awake. She blinked, realizing she had snoozed a bit on the sofa. I should," she said, lazily sitting up and stretching her arms. The movement made her hair all messed up, and Nanny fondly combed it down with her wrinkling hand. I'll prepare you dinner so you can eat when you wake up." "Okay, thank you. Good night, Nanny," she said sweetly, and the old woman chuckled. "Good night, miss." Althea went to bed to take a long nap, and it was fine for a while. She even dreamt about her childhood with her husband. She was running after him in their game of tag. However, just before she caught up to him, she was abruptly woken by a mysterious force that she couldn't describe. It was like there was an earthquake, but only the air shook. She sat up so quickly that she felt dizzy. Closing her eyes to calm her nerves, she looked around to see what woke her up. Confused, she opened her phone to look at the time, 8:34 p.m., and quickly realized that there was no signal. Then she heard toe-curling screams outside, from different directions. An odd feeling of foreboding crept up her spine. She ran to the only other person in the house, hand unconsciously on her stomach as she moved. "Auntie, are you all right?" she asked, gently knocking on the door. As she did so, she could hear weird scraping sounds followed by a low growl. Her instinct told her something dangerous was in there. She looked around to see a broom, decisively grabbing the shaft and taking off the brush. With a deep breath, she placed her soft hand on the handle and turned the knob to open the door, only to see a weird but familiar-looking creature standing in an odd posture, body parts bending at a weird angle, and skin festering with pus. It heard her arrival and turned, and her green eyes met with its lifeless ones. Bile rose up her stomach, but she pushed it down because it was at this moment that she realized who it was. Her heart dropped and her soul shook. Tears started forming in her eyes, and her body shivered in trepidation. Nanny. Chapter 4, 24 Hours. Nanny's neck turned at an indescribable angle the moment she opened the door. The eyes that used to look at her with love and warmth now didn't have anything. No emotions, no anger, no love, no life. This wasn't her Nanny anymore. Althea was in a daze for a while, her tears flowing. Even when she saw the creature walk towards her in unnatural, staggered steps, she couldn't move at all. It was only until the creature was only an arm's length away that she finally got back to her senses, and her body moved by instinct, hitting the creature with the metallic broomstick. Bang! The body fell, its neck turning 180 degrees. She watched as the body twitched weakly, and she almost wanted to go to check up on her. But the head turned back at a creepy angle, and the unfamiliar, lifeless eyes stared at her hungrily. Without bothering to bend back its legs, it dragged itself in her direction, opening its mouth in hopes of getting her meat. She didn't even have the time to mourn the loss of another loved one. Her body moved on its own, and she gripped the metal shaft on her hand. She hit the head of the monster with all her strength to stop her nanny's body from being soiled any further. +5 experience, +5 copper coins. Ding! She flinched at the sudden sound, looking around for its source. Congratulations, Taryn, for activating the Universe Assistance System. She could not even give a response. Your planet XZ8912, locally known as Taryn, is the only planet in the G239 and U834 galaxies to have intelligent civilizations. It was therefore judged to be an important endangered planet by the universe. Galaxies G239 and U834 will be deemed uninhabitable in less than 24 hours due to the current condition of its central star. In less than 24 hours, to preserve remaining life, all surviving indigenous creatures will be immigrated to the great continent of Xeno. Please note that items in the system-provided backpack can be taken with you. To be honest, Althea and her big brain failed to understand what the mechanical voice was saying. What is Xeno? She asked, but there was no response. Hello. No answer. What are you talking about? Migration. What do you mean the planet will perish? Still no answer. She frowned, eyes ending up on the woman who had just made her favorite dessert a few hours prior. She took a deep breath in an attempt to stop her tears, to keep her words coherent. Tell me, please, why did she become like this? None. Well, this was obviously one of those one-way no-reply messages. She shook her head and stared at the body, for a while not knowing what to do. She looked at the screen that appeared in front of her, following wherever she was looking, like that holographic screen that had just launched a few months ago. On the bottom left, there was a logo of a backpack, an icon of a head, and a logo of a sword. On the top right, there is a moving counter currently showing 23:45:03. She remembered that in 24 hours, a so-called migration would happen, and surmised the counter was about that. She then looked at the backpack icon and clicked on it. A virtual box appeared in front of her, floating. It was around 1 cubic meter in size. All items in the backpack will be taken with you. She repeated the voice's words, absent-mindedly looking at the phone and the shaft, and wondering how she could test this backpack space. She placed a hand on each item and visualized their location in the space. She blinked and looked at the backpack, and sure enough, the items were indeed arranged properly in the floating box in front of her. Normally, she'd be very interested in this, but her sights inevitably landed on the body next to her. She heaved out a sigh and straightened up her spine, as if it could give her the confidence to face whatever chaos was about to come, and walked in front of the corpse. While she couldn't give her a burial, a useless practice for a planet that was about to perish, she decided to place the body on the bed in the end. At the very least, it would be a more respectable way to go than carelessly sprawled on the floor. Properly arranging the body and closing her eyes, Althea made it appear that she was just sleeping. Althea bowed her head, silently thanking the older woman for all the care she had given. May you do well and find a good family in your next life, Nanny, she said, pausing. I love you. 23:25:32. She left the room and ended up in the living room. She grabbed the remote to see the news, but unfortunately, all the channels were black. Althea, still a little shaken, slowly walked towards her favorite chaise lounge, lied down, and stared at the ceiling. She allowed herself a moment of respite before thinking about her next step. She took a deep breath and looked at the other logos on her screen. She clicked on the logo of a person, and another set of texts appeared about a meter in front of her. Stats. Name, Althea Witt. Age, 25. Level, 0550. Life, 100-100. Spirit, 100-100 -5%. Physical, 20 -5%. Agility, 17 -20%. Defense, 9. Mana, 100. Physical potential, B. Mental potential, Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, wood, water, earth. Titles, none. Overall rank, S. Current status, gestating, 2 life forms, weakened state. Well, that explained all the minus signs. Her sights shifted to the last icon, the icon of the sword. After clicking it, a virtual doll version of herself appeared in front of her. Equipment list. Head, none. Ears, none. Body, basic night dress plus 0 defense. Arms, none. Legs, none. Hands, none. Feet, cotton slippers plus 0 defense, plus 0 agility. This was like a game. Although she wasn't much of a gamer, her brother was. They often asked her to play with them when they were young. This sight was not unfamiliar to her. But her sight couldn't help but stay on the stats. Only then did she start feeling her body and realize that she felt energized despite all the shock. Not to mention, her strength and speed were not like that at all. She totally blew Nanny's head with a hit, right? Although she had practiced self-defense techniques, she was sure she was neither that quick nor that strong. She was not sure if this was adrenaline, or was her body was somewhat improved. Temporarily putting that aside, she proceeded to explore the rest of the system. She stared at the final icon, the wallet. Wealth, 0 gold, 0 silver, 5 copper. It seemed that her millions of digital money were useless. She sat back up, trying to make an effective procurement plan. She had 24 hours to take what she needed. First of all, she had no idea where they were going to get transferred to, nor did they know of the resources that they would have access to. Hence, she needed to prepare well and make sure she had everything to maximize her chances of survival in that small space of 1 cubic meter. And what is that 0 gold, 0 silver, 5 copper in her stats? Money used in that other world. Althea gently patted her stomach, as if they needed to be calmed down, because calming them down would calm her down. It was just that. As she patted her stomach, her whole body froze. Is her stomach larger? Chapter 5, Beginning of a Money-Making Journey. No, not unknown. Her children didn't turn to monsters, right? However, just before she could enter her pregnancy mood swings panic dread, a gentle kick hit the walls of her stomach. This made her pause and instinctively place her palms on her bulging stomach. The next kicks then turned much gentler and soothing. It was as if her bobbies were telling her not to overreact. For the first time since all this started, she finally smiled. Everyone may be gone, but at least her children were still with her. She had to be well prepared, at least for them. The first thing she did was go to the kitchen and heat herself some food. She was not a good cook, but she was surrounded by them. Her father, Auntie, and her husband were all fabulous cooks. Auntie, God bless her soul, stored a few plates of ready-to-eat food in case she woke up in the middle of the night from hunger. She also took all the food in stock and in the pantry in her space backpack, filling up a few square centimeters of space. It was just that other than rice and a few canned foods, most of these foods were perishable. What actually bothered her the most was the money. The fact that these values appeared here meant that it was possible to obtain such currencies while they were still in their home planet. Obviously, digital money, which was most people's assets nowadays, was useless, so she could only check if paper money or any other valuables would suffice. She also needed to check what happened to her children, as well as some medicines, so she should at least pass by a hospital. However, she wondered, if the physique changed, would those medicines have any use? She stopped herself from thinking too much and accomplishing nothing. After a beat, she formulated her next point of action and stood up, heading to her room. She walked to her room's safety deposit box to see if cash could be converted to the system currency. Her delicate fingers pressed a few buttons, and the box opened. Revealing a few stacks of cash, she put away in case of emergencies. She held the paper in the palm of her hand, but she paused, unsure what to do. She just tried whatever and transferred it to the space. Nothing happened. She looked at the jewelry, took a handful of silver and gold jewelry, most of which were gifts from clients and friends, and placed it in the space. At first, it just stored there, but after a thought, she placed them back out. She repeated the same process, but with the intent to sell. Ding, a total of 230 grams of silver, 100 grams of gold. Would you like to convert it to coins? Yes, no. She clicked yes. Received, plus 1 gold coin, plus 2 silver coin, plus 30 copper coins. She stared at the remaining precious stones. Except for the jewelry her husband and family gave her, which was secure in the backpack, the rest was converted to system currency. Ding, 121 carats of Class E precious gems, 8 carats of Class A gems. Would you like to convert it to coins? Yes, no. She pressed no. Separating each type of gem, she transformed the colorful ones first and only got a total of 51 silver coins. The few carats of diamonds, on the other hand, earned her a whopping 5 gold coins. It seemed that gems high up on the Mohs scale had a much higher value in that other world. Then her sights fell on the safety deposit box itself. Ding, 50 kg of non-etha Class C precious metal detected. Would you like to convert it to coins? Yes, no. She clicked yes. Received, plus 69 silver coins. An eyebrow rose in interest as she perused the room and looked at the few antiques in the family collection. She stared at them for a moment, and it felt like they were staring back at her, scrutinizing. She apologized to the ancestors and tried to get the antiques converted as well. Unfortunately, like paper money, they were judged to have no value. She regretfully took out all the useless stuff from the backpack. She never would have thought she'd say this about money, from the backpack to save space. She took a look at her wallet again. Wealth, 6 gold coins, 122 silver coins, 30 copper coins. This was the first time she regretted being so modern. She should have stocked herself some hard currency had she known this would happen. In any case, she didn't know how far this little wealth could get her, but she was not going to take any chances. Not to mention, she had to fill up the entire 1 cubic meter to feel comfortable. Stretching her body, she turned her head to look at the floating clock on the top of her head. 22:54:03. At the sight of the numbers, she stood up and looked out the window to the dark scenery outside. In her neighborhood, this was a time that should have been filled with stillness, silence, and peace. Instead, it echoed with horrendous screams and yells for help. However, she knew in her gut that no one would have the energy to help others right now. She could only help herself. She went towards the door, taking out the handy broom shaft from the space. She rested long enough. Chapter 6, Leaving the House. As she stepped out of the threshold, she mentally reviewed what she knew of her milieu. The neighborhood she lived in was an upper-class neighborhood. It was located in the suburbs very near downtown, with residential composition ranging from nouveau rich, politicians, and stars. Each lot cut was around 300 SQM each, which was already very large considering this was still basically within the scope of the city. It could be said that a square meter of land here was worth a ton of gold. It wasn't that her adoptive family was so rich, however. They managed to own such a house because it was bought early by her mother's grandparents when it was still valued low. When her mother was young, a developer wanted to buy the lot for a questionable price, but they refused. Thankfully, at the time, Mother already made a name for herself in the academe and had developed a good network, so the developer could only compromise and let them join the development for a fair price. When they passed, the will named the 3 of them for a joint ownership. Althea was incredibly touched by the gesture, not by the money, but the thought that in their heart she and her husband were truly family. It was just that her brother was often on business trips, and her husband was often on missions, so when their parents left, the house was often empty. There were a total of 47 houses in this villa area, a couple of which took 2 or 3 cuts. All of them were undoubtedly well off and should have at least a bit of wealth at home. Such a pity for their hard-earned digital assets, though. Such a pity. In any case, she set her eyes on the house to her left, simply because the house on the right still had screaming women in it. She was not about to rob people who were still alive, nor would she risk her life to save others who may just want to depend on her. Forgive her for being unfeeling, but she couldn't do thankless things. She spent years in an orphanage, and even with the deliberate protection of her now husband, she had been exposed to the dark side of society fairly early. She was never the innocent little girl who wanted to save the world. More importantly, the people from that house were all snobbish nouveau rich, whose daughters had more than once ogled her husband inappropriately like hungry hyenas looking at delicious meat. She ignored the ear-piercing screams that also attracted a lot of zombies and turned towards her gate. As she neared the gate, she went to check if there were many monsters outside. After all, the disaster happened at the height of nightlife. She slowly opened the gate and closed it just as quickly. A second later, 5 zombies were trying to stretch their claws in. She stepped back, a bit scared, but she remembered the experience and the bit of money she could receive. So she gathered her wits and courage, and, using the sharp edge of the shaft, she poked the zombies in the eyes. It was easier than before because their arms were trapped in the gate. Elated by the discovery, she quickly poked the head of the others that were trapped. +5 copper coins, +5 experience. 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 To be honest, if it wasn't for the rancid smell that entered her nose and killed her brain, this could have been quite addicting. It was like playing the ancient-themed arcade game of whack-a-mole. Then the stench interrupted her thoughts again, and she felt like vomiting for real. She ran to the house to drink some water, because it would be a waste to use the bottled water in her backpack. While inside the house, she took a package of face masks and wore one. She would be exploring the neighborhood after all. The smell would only get worse. If she didn't do anything, maybe her nose would lose its function. She paused at a thought, an idea brewing in her mind. Smell. 10 minutes later. Althea stared at the bodies stuck on the gate with a complicated expression, seriously reconsidering this experiment. Was it worth it? However, she looked at the time again and swore to be more decisive. She held her breath, and with bated breath, she cut off the arms of the zombies within her property line. She then wrapped herself with blood and even wrapped an arm like a belt, just over her big belly. She felt like vomiting again. At this point, she wondered, would she give birth prematurely due to disgust? But only time will tell, and she had no choice but to learn the answer to that for real. She closed her eyes for a moment to gather herself. She also wanted to heave a deep breath, but she remembered the mind-melting smell and stopped herself just in time. She slowly opened up one of the gates, carefully hiding behind its panel. She let a few monsters enter, and then quickly locked the gate again. Another 3 monsters entered within those few seconds, and another half-dozen were trying to enter like the previous batch, albeit they were stopped in their tracks by the sturdy metallic fences. She couldn't help but stare at the dozens of zombies in her area, very concerned. There were already so many monsters in their sparsely populated neighborhood. She could not imagine what it would be like in the city. All these thoughts passed by her head, but her whole being was watching the monsters on full alert. She watched as they walked aimlessly around her garden, and she stood still to see what they would do. They walked around without a target, and Althea stood still until one of them started dragging its feet to her direction. Her grip on the shaft tightened, and she could swear she could hear her own heartbeat. G-R-R-R-R-R. The monster made some guttural noises as it explored the area in front of her, seemingly not seeing Althea there. It gave her a moment to study the monster. The monster looked young, in her teens, and it seemed like the other zombies that entered were also in the same age group. They were probably neighborhood teens going to a party when the transformation happened. As the monster trudged across the lawn, closer and closer to where she was, Althea could see the pus and decaying skin on her face, the fluid coming out from the orifices, and the heavily pregnant Althea just wanted to puke again. The monster was turning around, and it suddenly twisted its deformed head to face her, and she felt her heart drop to where her children were. But it only paused for a few seconds before it finally looked away. Althea heaved a deep breath and raised her rod, attacking it on an orifice while it was looking away. +5 copper coins, +5 experience. The noise attracted the other 3, and they ran to where the body fell, but they stopped when the noise did the same. From her observation, the main organ working for these monsters was the ear. They were blind, which was a relief. As for the sense of smell, they should have it, but it was probably not much different from how it was when they were human, as seen by how an arm hanging around her could cover her own smell. This made sense because hearing tended to retain its functions longer than the other 2 senses, even during aging. Not to mention, in accidents, the eyes and nose statistically lost functions faster than the ears that underwent the same trauma. Taking note of her new discovery, she quickly killed the remaining ones inside. +5 copper coins, +5 experience. +5 copper coins, +5 experience. +5 copper coins, +5 experience. Ding! Congratulations for leveling up to level 1. With this announcement, she felt that some sort of aura exploded from her body, making the monsters outside crazier. As if suddenly injected with a stimulant, about a dozen more zombies started attacking the gate. Fortunately, the gate was strong enough, otherwise, they'd have broken it with sheer numbers alone. Regardless of the zombies outside, Althea was in a better mood. She really felt that her body had improved. Her body felt lighter, she felt more energetic, and her senses a little bit sharper. Of course, this also meant the rancid smell kicked differently. Disregarding this, she looked at the dozens of monsters trying to destroy her gate. With a bit more confidence, she headed towards these monsters, starting to see them as targets to hunt. Chapter 7, Exploring the Neighborhood Part 1. 22-06-08. Stats. Name, Althea Witt. Age, 25. Level, 1, 145-1000. Life, 190-200. Spirit, 121-200, -5%. Physical, 30-5%. Agility, 27 -20%. Attack, 8. Defense, 15. Mana, 100. Physical potential, B. Mental potential. Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, wood, water, earth. Titles, none. Overall rank, S. Current status, gestating, 2 life forms, weakened state. Her eyes paused at spirit and judged it must have something to do with stamina. As for what would happen if these got too low, she'd rather not find out for herself. She went back to the house to take a little rest. Killing those dozens of zombies had not been easy, especially in her current state. It was really fortunate that the gate was able to handle the weight, and the zombies she had to deal with were only a few at a time. First, she had killed the ones accessible through the gaps of the gates, and then killed the overflowing ones climbing up the corpses. Although they could not smell her, she made a lot of noise, so she managed to attract the zombies until there were none in her street. She was actually surprised by the number of people here. After all, the 40 or so households wouldn't have more than 10 people on average, including the servants. Although this was a high-end villa area, this was still in the city's scope. How large could single detached houses get? In her street alone, there shouldn't be so many zombies ambling about outside. What she didn't know yet was that the neighbors held some sort of reunion. It just so happened that many of the guests were hanging around in the gardens and outside. Amusingly, they had the old age theme, so the zombies were all wearing old-school party clothes. She was relieved to notice that her spirit had risen to 150 after half an hour of rest. Now that she had an idea of the rate of spirit increase, she could resume her adventure outside. She could feel that she was stronger, and she could jump a few meters. If she wasn't pregnant, of course. Now that she was carrying 2 kids, she couldn't be so presumptuous. So she took out the ladder and placed it on the adjoining wall with the neighbor. Standing on the wall, she took the foldable ladder to the other side so she could effortlessly cross to the neighbor's lawn. This neighbor was a former politician, with very classy young wives, wife and sister-in-law. It was very likely they weren't home at this time, considering their very active nightlife. Their house was a classically designed home of 3 floors. It had intricate patterns, cornices, and others. Even the gutters had curves. Checking the surroundings for monsters, she slowly walked towards the direction of the house. Her steps were lithe and light, and her handy weapon was ready to be used at any time. It didn't take long for her to hear rustling and growling. Her feet paused, waiting for the rustles to get closer, likely to be attracted by her arrival. But when she stopped moving, the zombies no longer had a way to determine her location, and the 2 servant zombies ended up zoning around. Her armor of zombie goo was still useful, so they didn't actively attack her even as she approached them. She took them down quite easily. +5 copper, +5 experience. +5 copper, +5 experience. +5 copper, +5 experience. Hey, practice made perfect. It had been a while since she practiced fencing, but she felt that she was getting pretty good. She reached the door of the house and deliberately called for people in case the owner was still in the house. She was not so desperate as to rob a house with the owner still in the house. "Hello, anyone there?" No answer. She asked again, "Hello?" Still no answer. Seeing that there was no one home, she opened the door by destroying the handle. It happened very suddenly. She had not even stepped past the threshold when she heard a sudden gust of wind whip in her direction, something lunging at her from the shadows. In a swift motion, she barely blocked the sharp teeth of the toy dog with the shaft. Clang! Her heart stopped for a moment as she gaped at the ferocious fangs snap shut mere inches away from her face. The creature's horrid breath, combined with the smell of its decaying body, attacked her sense of smell. It was so rancid that she almost blacked out. But she kept the bile down and kept defending herself, swinging the shaft to where her instincts told her to, eventually connecting to the skull of the creature. She kicked it away and struck another direction, directly hitting the ribcage of the other one. The shadows were thrown a few steps back in similar directions, and Althea held her makeshift weapon, a little shaken from the shock. There were indeed creatures that approached her, but they were not zombies, but zombie dogs. Their eyes were vacant and glazed, but their growls told her they were hungry for her meat. A moment later, the 2 dogs lunged at her with speed that those previous zombies could not compare. Fortunately, she was no longer taken by surprise and managed to avoid being mauled by their sharp fangs. The dog she hit on the head already had an open skull. Its movements were slower and much easier to deal with. Adrenaline flowing through her veins, Althea lifted the rod, and while avoiding the other dog's attack, threw down a powerful stroke that finally ended one of the dogs. Not taking an extra breath, she turned her weapon to block a deadly bite, and she could see the metal handle slowly bending. She shivered at how sharp the bites were, and she immediately whipped the rod with the dog attached to it. It refused to budge. If anything, it was just bending her weapon. Seeing that she may even lose control of her only weapon, she fought for the rod with all her strength, and they eventually ended up inside the house. However, the dog's grip was too strong. Instead, she hit the rod with the dog towards the art feature with sharp edges. The dog's body splattered with blood and finally let go of her weapon. She hit it over and over until a familiar ding echoed in her head, and she finally heaved a sigh of relief. +10 copper, +10 experience. She dragged her feet to the door and closed it, for fear of new monsters being attracted by the noise. At this time, she allowed herself a short moment of respite. So animals turned to those monsters, too. And because of their physiques, they were also innately harder to deal with. Most importantly, they could smell her underneath all this gruel. She instinctively cradled her belly, feeling a little shaken. It seemed that she still thought things too lightly. Chapter 8, Exploring the Neighborhood Part 2. After recovering some of her wits, Althea looked at her status bar and saw a full 20 points of spirit were deducted. However, she dared not rest for too long, and she began to peruse around the luxurious living room after a couple minutes of breather. If the outside details were showy, the house's interiors were just gaudy. There was a mishmash of expensive displays and antiques. The upholstery had patterns, and even the cornices had intricate designs. It was visually exhausting. It was like the owner was a peacock. Maybe he was. Anyway, she immediately held the items in an attempt to sell them. She was surprised to find that, basically, every display had value. +2 gold. +4 gold. +23 silver. +12 silver. +3 gold. Elated, she happily continued exploring the rooms of the house, killing a few more servant zombies along the way. She earned quite a bit of money from the first floor alone. As she walked, her eyes were attracted to a wall-mounted rack not too far away, and her green eyes brightened. "A golf club set," she uttered, her strides taking her in front of it. It was a complete set, made of cutting-edge materials like a titanium head. She looked at it in excitement and determined the best weapon would be the golf driver or the wood one, which remained in her hand while she kept the rest inside her space. She then went to the kitchen and took all bottled water and food with a long shelf life. Satisfied, Althea went to the next floor and ended up in the mistress's, sister-in-law's room. She knew whose room it was because this woman loved pink to the point that it was pathological. Every time she ambled and jogged around the neighborhood, anyone could see her figure by virtue of her bright-colored clothes alone. Anyway, after shuffling through the woman's items, she found the jewelry and exchanged it for a few hundred silver. Althea then went to the master's bedroom and took in a few high-quality coats and leather attires for men and women. She found all the valuables, watches, and the like, and got hundreds of silver and dozens of gold coins in exchange. It took her a while to find the safety deposit box, though. After a lot of effort, she eventually found it in the study, under the carpet floor. She didn't bother to open it and exchanged it directly, surprised to find that her balance increased by scores of gold coins. Politicians were really rich, in hard currency, too. She exited the house to the east wall and repeated the old trick. It was just that the garden of this neighbor was full of rockery, so she didn't dare jump down carelessly. She did the same thing with this one and proceeded to a few more abodes. After 4 more houses, she had already gained quite a bit. She thanked the heavens that she had the foundation for self-defense. Since her husband learned, she and Ansel learned too. Especially when he became a soldier, in which case their repertoire of fighting knowledge expanded tremendously in turn. How many stalkers she handled with the techniques she learned, she didn't even know. What surprised her the most was the lack of animals, though. At first, she was fully prepared for encountering zombie pets because of the trouble the mutts caused her. But, after so many houses, she had yet to encounter another one. Then she saw the untransformed body of the guard dogs, and then rats and cats. She realized that whatever it was that affected people's genes and turned them into zombies, it was too much for most animals. She felt sad for the animals, but at least they didn't have to suffer through this hell. She shook her head of the thoughts. She had no time to feel sorry for others right now. With that thought, she continued her trip after another short break. Using her armor bug, she breezed through a full 7 more houses and finally checked on her status during a short break. Stats. Name, Althea Witt. Age, 25. Level, 1, 585 1000. Life, 200. Spirit, 102 200 -5%. Physical, 30 -5%. Agility, 27 -20%. Attack, 11 plus 1. Defense, 16 plus 3. Mana, 100. Physical potential, B. Mental potential. Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, wood, water, earth. Titles, none. Overall rank, S. Current status, gestating, 2 life forms, weakened state. Equipment list. Head, face mask plus 0 defense. Ears, none. Body, leather jacket plus 1 defense, cotton shirt plus 0 defense. Arms, none. Legs, leather pants plus 1 defense. Hands, metal rod plus 1 attack. Feet, rubber boots plus 1 defense, plus 0 agility. Wealth, 89 gold coins, 1522 silver coins, 2330 copper coins. Her biggest gain, though, was the baby products. Although it was only an opened can of powdered milk and diapers, it reminded her that she needed to stock up on these as well. Sigh, she almost forgot her Bobby's food. Another thing she learned was about the survival rates of human beings. In all of the houses, there were no other survivors at all. This survival rate was not even 5%. She felt heavy at this realization. Her husband, wherever he was, did they have to go through this as well? What about her friends? What about her brother? Did he turn to one of these things? If he didn't, he was probably surrounded by them now, right? Alas, he was hundreds of kilometers away from her. She could not do anything about it with her current abilities. Worrying would be for naught and wouldn't help him at all. In the end, she decided to just prepare as much as she could, and maybe they would meet in that other world and she could support them. It was just that as smooth as she had gone through the first part of the neighborhood, she encountered quite a bit of a challenge in the next house. Chapter 9, Ansel Part 1. Aberdeen City, 16 years ago. 7-year-old Ansel just felt ringing in his ears, his vision darkening, and his entire body shook in fear. He didn't know what happened. One time he was playing alone in the sandbox, next it was all dark and cold and scary. When will they send the money? Little Ansel turned his head to the door, hearing an unfamiliar voice. He was answered by another strange voice, one with an annoying screech to it, and the sound alone made the sensitive Ansel frown deeper. The woman said to give them an hour. As expected of famous literates and scientists, gathering funds everywhere isn't a problem. A disgusting cackle sounded afterward, joined by hoots and celebratory yells. Ansel still didn't fully understand his situation, but he knew he was in trouble. Was he going to die, like those rabbits in Animal Planet? However, before he dwelled on this thought, he felt a tap on his shoulders and he flinched by instinct. He almost yelled out when a small hand blocked his mouth. His eyes widened as he saw the most beautiful eyes staring back at him. "S-H-H-H-H-H-H," she mumbled cutely, placing her free index finger on her lips. She then turned her head to behind the barrel. She waved her hand at him, telling him to follow. It was a small hole hidden behind the barrels. He watched as she crawled inside and her butt even got stuck in the hole. After struggling, she managed to squeeze in, and the sight made even the most timid kid, him, chuckle. But when she disappeared, little Ansel couldn't help but just stare at the passage, not really knowing what to do. But then her small head appeared again, and she stared at him with a frown. "What are you doing?" she mouthed. "Come on." His body moved on its own to follow. He was smaller than she was, so he didn't struggle to enter at all. It was just that his arms touched sticky substances that made his skin crawl. However, before he could even look at her with tears in his eyes, she was already crawling meters away from him, totally unaffected by the dirt. Seeing that there was no one to comfort him, he pursed his lips and followed. Following her lead, he crawled with her on the dirty floor covered with disgusting muck and sludge. It was still dark, cold, and damp, but he didn't feel as scared as he had been. 20, 34, 23. Ansel ran to the door, closing it, using his whole weight to block the door. Heaving a deep breath, he used much of his strength to quickly pull the side table, blocking the door from the feral creature pushing on the other side. The door continued to knock, but fortunately, the metallic door was stable enough. Unless the zombies found out that they could pull the double swing door to open it, he was fine for now. Finally getting a bit of respite, his legs gave out and he found himself lying on the floor. His hair was akin to a chicken nest, body was covered in blood and gore, totally unlike his usual suave self. This moment of calm after so many hours allowed him some sort of respite, long enough for him to finally absorb what was happening. The world had gone crazy. One moment he was having a decent dinner with rich clients after a successful deal. The next moment they all froze, twitched, and started salivating at the sight of him. Since then, he had been in the restaurant switching hiding places from room to room. He was also a bit lucky that another more active survivor was running around and attracting the aggro. Because of this, he simply had to estimate where they would be running towards and try to avoid as many zombies as he could, using the silent gun he got from the client's guards to kill those that came in his way. He pulled out his phone and frowned at the fact that there was still no signal. How was Althea? He couldn't help but imagine a very pregnant Althea running from these blasted things in a ghast. However, thinking how she had always been headstrong, combined with her skills and wit, she was probably doing better than he was. Not to mention, she was staying in the suburbs. There should be fewer zombies, right? He looked at his last gun, on its last few bullets. They were all taken from the client's bodyguards, and he had already scrapped a few in the past few hours. It could be said that he was still a bit lucky. If the deal had happened in any other place in Eden Country, the guards wouldn't have been able to smuggle guns in. He shivered at the thought of having no decent weapon in the midst of these ugly, smelly monsters. He'd rather self-destruct than turn into one of those horrid pieces of existence. Speaking of, he needed to find a new weapon lest he join this army of zombies. He opened up his phone and looked at the saved map, planning his route back to Aberdeen City. Maybe he could also find a good place to get a new weapon. A normal drive would take at least half a day, let alone now that cars were parked in the middle of the road, making it virtually impossible to breeze through the streets as they could have. His shoulder slumped in disappointment. When will he see Althea again? Then he remembered a new train line opened from the neighboring city to Bruno City, which was not far from home. This train was fully automated. Maybe it was still operational. The phone and radio signals might be lost, but seeing as there was still electricity, it seemed that it hadn't been interrupted. Hey, either way, he really didn't have a choice. No matter what, he had to be within her vicinity. Only that way would he ever have peace. Chapter 10, Ansel Part 2. Calming himself, he took time to take a look at his stats. Stats. Name, Ansel. Age, 23. Level, 1, 15, 1000. Life, 150-200. Spirit, 92-200. Physical, 42. Agility, 35. Attack, 21. Defense, 17. Mana, 100. Physical potential, S. Mental potential, A+. Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, fire. Titles, none. Overall rank, A. Current status, weakened. Equipment list. Head, none. Ears, none. Body, wool suit, cotton polo +0 defense. Arms, none. Legs, wool pants +0 defense. Hands, gun plus attack indeterminate. Feet, leather shoes +1 defense, +0 agility. Wealth, 43 gold, 0 silver, 130 copper. As a gamer, he naturally had an idea of what those stats meant, although he was a bit disappointed that many gold bars only got him a few scores of gold. The client paid in gold, and he had not had the time to gather other things. For one thing, other than the gun he stole, he didn't have anything else after so many hours of hiding. The so-called space backpack only contained a couple of mint candies he got from a countertop. He sighed in self-pity and looked around, but froze when he finally realized where he was. His sexy peach blossom eyes brightened at the sight. He was in the kitchen, an empty one at that. The zombies must have gotten out a long time ago, leaving this oasis of normalcy for him to find. His sights landed on kitchen knives, as well as those huge scissors used to cut meat on table grills. He took them all into his space. He took everything that could be used as a weapon, including the chopping board. He scurried to the fridge and filled the backpack with all the food and water that could fit. Mostly filling food like rice and flour were given priority. A bit of meat and fruits were added, and the rest was potable water. After looking around for a bit to see if he missed anything, he went to find the back door of the kitchen to exit from there, only to see about a dozen zombies turning their heads to him simultaneously. His scalp numbed at the sight, each hair on his body rising in fear. He quickly closed the door and dragged another table to bar it. On cue, the door started banging, and it felt like his heart rose to his throat. He tried to gulp the nerves down, but to no avail. Damned city, even back alleys have so many people. Fortunately, after several minutes, he was certain that the obstacle worked. He eventually got used to the banging and scratching on the door, finally letting his heart get back into place. He made a quick calculation and decided that handling the zombies inside was still easier than those outside. He looked at the ceilings. This city was one of the older cities that hadn't been developed much, so many of the cities here had relatively older systems. He watched an old movie that ventilation in the olden days could fit people. He looked up the walls and saw the vents. His ears could hear some rumbling sounds from within. He hoped that there weren't meat-grinding fans that would turn him into a minstancel. His sister, he didn't know if she would laugh or cry at him at that time. As for Garen, he would probably sneer. Shame, he'd say, all that training for nothing. Anyway, he tried to make a mental map of the building, trying to find his way to the parking lot. After heaving a sigh, he dragged a table to the area underneath the vent, trying to open it. Because it wasn't a common sight in his generation, he struggled for a bit, until he realized he needed something thin to pull it out. He stepped down and looked for something that could do the job, and settled with a small knife. It was not easy because he didn't have the right tool and he was starting to get impatient. He almost dropped the knife many times, and when the lid finally loosened, he almost cheered like a little brat. It was just that the moment he entered, his eyes twitched. Fooage. Spiderwebs, dust, grime. Everywhere, on every freaking surface. Whoever filmed those movies was liars. Obviously, these things were clean in the movies. He should sue. However, it was still better than rotting meat trying to eat him, so he sucked it up and just covered his mouth and nostrils with a handkerchief to avoid getting lung disease or something. As he crawled, arm by arm, leg by leg, he couldn't help but enter a melancholic mood. He was reminded of that time he escaped from kidnappers. Only Althea wasn't here with him. He did not dwell in self-pity for too long, primarily because the place was uncomfortable to sulk in, and he steeled himself, crawling forward. It took him a full hour to get somewhere downstairs without a damned zombie. Ignoring his inevitable sneezing and the cringe from all the dust that stuck to him because of the grime. Hell, he felt like puking. He trudged on, like a brave warrior. He would eventually be able to find the relevant intersections. Fortunately, he had a decent memory and knew which hallway he had passed by. After carefully opening the lid from inside, he jumped down with the knife in his hand, ready to attack whatever glomped at him. 2 zombies were nearby, and they heard the noise, running towards him. Fortunately, zombies were a bit slower than normal people due to rigor mortis. Not to mention, he was not without martial arts training. This was because he didn't want to lose to the nominal brother, who took all the admiration of his sister and parents. So, dealing with 2 zombies was no problem at all. He gained confidence as headed towards the elevator, only to hear scratching noises and growls quickly approaching. It was also a zombie, but it was a familiar one. It was that survivor who had been kindly distracting the restaurant zombies a few hours back. He felt a little sad. That guy didn't make it after all. However, his lax attitude quickly disappeared when he saw how the damned thing moved. It was at least thrice as fast as a normal zombie, okay. A bit panicked, he could barely block the zombie's attacks with his kitchen knife. He basically could only defend himself for several rounds until he started to be more proactive in attacking. Only, the damned thing was really fast. A few minutes later, the zombie still couldn't be taken down. He feared the noise would attract more zombies. He was losing, and he was not reconciled. At this time, an idea popped out his head, and he quickly took out a random piece of meat from the backpack space. Sure enough, the zombie was momentarily distracted, but this 1 second was enough for Ansel to stab through its head. Plus 15 copper, plus 15 experience. Respecting the holy principle of no waste, he took back the bait meat. However, even if the zombie didn't touch it, he wouldn't be eating it after landing on the floor with who knew what kind of zombie goo. He marked the meat and thought that if he ever found a fishing rod, this would be its bait. After letting himself breathe for a few seconds, he dragged himself to the elevator. He closed his eyes and let himself rest for a few seconds of travel time. After all, he knew that he still had a long way to go before getting back home.